From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Trump's promise of 25% auto tariffs to join reciprocal tariffs taking effect next week draws swift criticism and threats of retaliation from trading partners like Europe and Canada. We'll discuss the impact with Andrew Hale at the Heritage Foundation and the uncertainty they're creating in the U.S. economy with Bloomberg opinion contributor Kyla Scanlon.
Attorney General Pam Bondi suggesting she will not seek an investigation into the Signal Group chat. We'll consider the fallout with Sabrina Singh, former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary for the Biden administration.
And the U.S. is now pushing to control all future infrastructure and mineral investments in Ukraine. We'll get reaction from Daniel Fried, former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and former U.S. Ambassador to Poland.
Thanks for joining us on the late edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We begin with threats of retaliation coming from U.S. trading partners after President Trump announced right at this time yesterday his plans to hit auto imports with a 25% tariff starting April 2nd. The European Union now weighing its options, including, they say, the deployment of what they're calling an anti-coercion instrument. And Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum had these responses earlier.
When President Trump threatens us again, we will fight back. We will fight back with everything we have to get the best deal for Canada. We have a number of measures that we can take in response to those initiatives.
And on April 3rd, we will be presenting a comprehensive response to what Mexico is going to do in the face of this new situation. And that does not mean that on April 3rd, we will close the doors on working with the United States. We will always look for what is best for Mexico at that moment.
Joining us now is Bloomberg's Laura Davison. So, Laura, as we look ahead to next week and know that President Trump has suggested he actually is going to be, in his mind at least, fair and perhaps more lenient than countries are expecting, if there is indeed retaliation, is he signaling that the U.S. is just going to take that, or do things suddenly become a little bit more or less lenient, rather?
It's possible we will see less leniency or see kind of certain targeted tariffs like that 200% on European wine and alcohol spirits that he's suggested that he may take a targeted approach on some of these countries he doesn't like. He's really said a bunch of different things about what this April 2nd deadline will look like. He's suggested that there's an opportunity to negotiate up until April 2nd, but he's also said he doesn't want to allow too many exceptions. He also has said that he doesn't really want to allow for much negotiation. So it's really up to sort of the trading partners that are figuring out, okay, what's the best approach? So far, no one has seemed to gotten it. The Canadians kind of had this more like war posture. Mexico was much more, let's be cool and calm about it. Neither of them really got anything out of it so far.
Remarkable to see how much of a U.S.-made vehicle, in some cases, particularly for GM, is assembled outside of this country. Is the phone ringing at the White House from the big three who want him to stop?
It certainly is. And Susie Wiles has been involved in some of those conversations going back to last month when they got that 1 month reprieve. But it's clear that the automakers haven't figured out a plan here either, like the various heads of state. Hyundai was in here just in Washington just this week announcing this big investment. They were also not spared from this. This has really been sort of a conundrum for all these companies as they're figuring out the rules until yesterday were that you could move parts across the North American continent really without penalty. And that is really that's changed and with the stroke of a pen.
With us in Washington, Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Laura, thank you so much. As we add the voice now and consider the economic impact of all of this, Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst for Trade Policy at the Heritage Foundation. It's great to have you back, sir. What do you think about Liberation Day next week? Is this another head fake or the start of a real trade war?
Well, we need clarity, we need continuity, and we need to know what a lot of diplomats in Washington are saying, and officials and senators and congressmen. We want to know where this is going to land. We want to have a clear process, and regardless of what that is, we'll then know what to work with. But the markets want clarity, they want continuity. Businesses need to have this so they can make plans for their projects and their investments. And I think that's what we all want at this point. We want to know exactly what they're going to do, and we want a process and something that we can follow so we can start making decisions. And of course, we've seen how the markets have reacted to the uncertainty.
Well, and when we consider business decision making, Andrew, it's one thing if tariffs are actually implemented. It's another to have to make those decisions when you aren't sure, to your point, what ultimately these costs are going to look like in terms of input costs you're going to have to pay. Is it possible that even if not everything the president has outlined comes to fruition, we still see the detrimental effects in the manufacturing economy in the U.S.?
Well, for example, if you look at, for example, steel and aluminium tariffs, they will certainly benefit American steel companies like Cleveland-Cliffs, okay? But we get 40% of our steel from Canada, refined steel. We only have 11 blast furnaces left in the United States. We had 57 in 1990. And it's so difficult to get planning permission, zoning, et cetera, and EPA regulations are really difficult for the production of steel and to getting new blast furnaces. So we're not going to replicate the 40% overnight we're getting from Canada, and tariffs are not going to bring that about. What we're going to do is we're going to pay more for steel. And steel goes into the table I'm sitting at, the chair, my toaster, appliances, the door knob I'm looking at, the hinges on the door. These things will become more expensive. And then, of course, it does have an effect on downstream industries and downstream workers as well. So, yes, our major steel companies will do very well. And we're picking potentially, I don't want to pick winners and losers. No, I know that the administration prioritizes steel, auto manufacturing, aluminum. The auto manufacturing tariffs are 232 national security tariffs. Yes, in a time of war, we do need to have a strong manufacturing base so we can shift to a military-industrial complex economy. But again, we also need to be concerned about the effect that this is going to have on the consumer. And at the end of the day, tariffs can be a tax on the consumer.
There remains a question, though, Andrew, about the end game. Are you trying to raise money? Are you trying to raise revenue or zero out a trade imbalance with any number of nations? We talked about that earlier today on Balance of Power with Jared Bernstein, the former director of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, of course, Biden administration. This is what he said about the impact and strategy of this approach.
These broad-based tariffs have never been shown to lower the trade deficit. They've never been shown, even if you do lower the trade deficit, for that to translate into more factory jobs. We had a lot more success tapping an untapped demand or elasticity for people who wanted to build factories in this country. Many of those factories are underway. Those shovels are in the ground, and that's still ongoing. But that has proven already to be a lot more successful than the tariff strategy.
So we have a philosophical disagreement here, Andrew. Where do you stand?
Well, I'm less concerned about, for example, the trade deficit as some others are, because that's the flip side of a demand for our financial assets. The whole world wants to invest in the United States. I'm less concerned about the trade deficit as others, but that's a personal point of view. But I want to talk about, if I could say, I could answer that with the recent tariffs, 25%, 232 tariffs on auto manufacturing. I mean, these tariffs are designed to boost American auto manufacturing by encouraging the final assembly in the U.S. factories. And as more production shifts to the U.S., the theory is wages in the auto sector and related industries are expected to rise due to increased demand for skilled labor. That's why the United Auto Workers are supporting this. Having said that, let's look at, for example, domestic U.S. manufacturers of autos like GM and Ford. During the production process, so many of the intermediate goods crisscross the U.S.-Canadian border a number of times in the manufacturing process. We should not be tariffing those intermediate goods every time they cross the border. We need tariff-free intermediate goods for our domestic manufacturing, and that's how you boost a manufacturing here in the United States without hurting the consumer and downstream industries and workers.
Well, so when we consider boosting manufacturing in the U.S., which is what ties into the administration's kind of phrasing here about this potentially being some short-term pain for longer-term gain in those longer-term investments companies, in their mind, will make because of these tariffs, how long realistically is that time horizon till we realize that manufacturing in the U.S.? Because you can't just snap your fingers and have a factory built with workers to populate it overnight.
Well, as I've said, it takes a long time, and just keep the permission to build a new blast furnace for the production of refined steel takes a great deal of time and it's extremely expensive. We priced ourselves out of the market. That's why we're getting 40% of our steel from Canada, because, of course, they also have very high EPA environmental regulations, but their steel is made with nuclear power, and, of course, they have vast amounts of hydroelectric power. It's very difficult to build nuclear reactors here in the United States, given the regulations. So I actually think that potentially with regards to tariffs, I do think that there are occasions where tariffs can be a benefit, certainly with regards to as a negotiating tool to obtain market access in other markets. But with regards to, right here with manufacturing, we just simply don't have the infrastructure to do this. So I think and that's largely because of these regulations. So if we could take a blowtorch to some of the regulations that prohibit us from building the infrastructure for manufacturing in the United States, that would be best to try that first, because I think we might be putting the cart before the horse by immediately, going to the tariff.
All right, Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst for Trade Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, the fallout continues from the signal security breach as the White House is struggling to defend against criticism of the incident. Sabrina Singh, former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary, joins us next to discuss on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Well, first, it was sensitive information, not classified, and inadvertently released. This was not classified information, and we are very pleased with the results of that operation and that the entire world is safer because of it.
Attorney General Pam Bondi earlier today indicating the Justice Department would not open a criminal investigation into the sharing of military attack plans in a group signal chat. Meanwhile, the top senators on the Armed Services Committee are demanding an investigation. Republican Chairman Roger Wicker and Democratic Ranking Member Jack Reed sending a joint letter to the Pentagon's acting Inspector General to review the case. The Pentagon's previous Inspector General was among those President Trump fired shortly after taking office. And joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Sabrina Singh, former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary during the Biden administration, here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Sabrina, thank you so much for your time. When we consider the way in which an investigation may or may not move forward, given your time at the Pentagon, would it be your expectation that one of the first things that an investigation establishes is that this was classified information that was shared?
I mean, from an objective standpoint, and having served in the administration previously and understood all the sensitivities that go into an operation, I mean, and folks on the Joint Staff would also say the same thing. Everything in that text thread was classified, especially what Pete Hegseth put in, that in particular. What the Trump administration is saying that it was not classified information. The investigation would go into examining where that information came from and if, in fact, it did come from classified documents, which I believe they would find that. But that's exactly what the investigation would look into. And, to your point, Donald Trump fired all the inspector generals for all the agencies. So I don't know who is in that acting position right now. But if I were still there and this happened under, with any other employee, the IG for DOD would be looking into this, and no doubt Congress would be as well.
How does this play in the Pentagon? What do you hear from your former colleagues, your old contacts? Because the Trump administration says you're telling the wrong story. Enlistment is up sharply since Donald Trump was elected and since he took office. As you just heard from the Attorney General, the mission was a success. Is that partly true? We're looking at the wrong story here?
I actually think there's two separate things here. One, recruitment was going up under the Biden administration. In December, Army saw great numbers. So that's a good thing. We should celebrate that. And I hope recruitment does continue to go up under this administration. Two, the operation was successful. That's because we have the best of the best serving in our military. They should be applauded for that. What the Trump administration is doing to continue to degrade Houthi capabilities, that's a good thing. Let's celebrate that. What's not a good thing is what the Secretary of Defense did, which is put those fighter pilots that were going and pre-stage, pre-operation at risk. He put the entire timeline and sequencing of events in an unclassified commercial texting app. Everything that's pre-operational before an event begins is always classified. It is to protect our pilots in the air, our fighter pilots. So how does this play in the building? I think, again, anyone else knows the operational risks and security that the secretary took. And, he's going to have to face accountability, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in terms of accountability, had it been anyone else inside the Pentagon, would they still be in their position right now?
Oh, I mean, no, absolutely not. I can tell you any other DOD employee, any other state employee, any other NSC employee would have been immediately put on administrative leave. There would have been an investigation launched probably right away. And ultimately, the decisions from that investigations would have yielded the appropriate accountability or punishment.
Talk to us about this assertion from the president himself, along with others in the national security team we've heard from this week, that there isn't an effective platform for real-time communication, that it's cumbersome, it's old-fashioned, we don't have time to get to a skiff and meet. We need a platform like this. A, is that true?
No.
And okay, well, then tell us why. And is it time for something more up-to-date? What are the tools?
So that is just absolutely not true. So that entire text thread has the entire national security apparatus on it. Yeah. Every single one of those individuals has a suite of classified, whether it be phones, computers, video calling, accessible to them either in their offices, remotely at their home, or just say you're out with your family and the president needs to get a hold of you, you have access to a classified device at all times. So that's not an excuse. There is rooms like the Situation Room or classified rooms called SCIFs that any person that needs, authorization to speak to someone else, their counterpart, can go into at any time and pick up the phone and make a call. The Secretary of Defense has that whole suite in his office. So to say that, systems are cumbersome, to some extent, classified systems are cumbersome because it's a different desktop. It's physically different systems from your unclassified system. But it's not like you have to physically get up from your desk. I mean, you just kind of hit a switch at your desk and the secretary can be on a classified system, a top secret classified system, or switch back. So it's very easy, actually.
Well, so when we consider the way the communication happens internally, how does it work? Does it work any differently when we're receiving information, whether it be military plans for joint operations with other countries or intelligence that our intelligence sharing partners are sharing with us? What chain? What is necessary in that chain of sharing that information? And does this suggest that any of those protocol could have been breached as well?
So everything that was shared in that chain is completely fine to be discussed and shared on classified systems. That is exactly what, it's important for the Secretary of State to know the cadence of when these strikes are going to occur. Same with the National Security Advisor. So doing that in a classified setting, updating the president, the National Security Advisor needs to be able to walk into the president and say, the strikes are beginning, our fighter pilots are in the air. That's all okay being done in a classified setting. When I was in the administration, we never discussed an operation. We didn't even confirm an operation had happened until our fighter pilots were safe. And only then would we start confirming that. Even if there were media reporting, even if there were social media, videos out there, we wouldn't confirm it until our pilots were safe. And that's when the downgrading of information can happen, when the operation has concluded. And that's what the American people deserve to know. But pre-operation, during the operation, you never talk about some of these things.
This has been helpful. It's great to have you with us here in studio. Sabrina Singh, the former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary, with us on Balance of Power. Thank you so much. Coming up, we turn to how tariff uncertainty is impacting consumer confidence, and a look with Kyla Scanlon, a Bloomberg opinion contributor, next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
I've been at the Fed for 10 years, and this is the most dramatic shift in confidence that I can recall, except for when COVID hit in March of 2020. A lot of it is uncertainty around the tariffs.
Neil Kashkari, Minneapolis Fed president, yesterday at a Fed listeners event in Detroit. The conversation centered on how tariffs are causing a shift in confidence among consumers. And with us now to discuss how young Americans are reacting to this economic uncertainty. Kyla Scanlon, Bloomberg opinion contributor. Kyla, it's great to have you with us as part of our conversation here on balance of power. What does this mean? We talk so much about people concerned about their retirement savings, concerned about their nest egg. What does it mean for a millennial right now trying to get some stability in this economy?
I think for both millennial and Gen Zs, they're trying to navigate this particularly uncertain economic environment. It feels like every time you turn around, there's something new with tariffs or something being undone with tariffs. Connor Sen over at Bloomberg Opinion wrote an excellent piece titled "The Gen Z Job Recession." And I think a lot of Gen Zers are experiencing that uncertainty as well. You know, you're graduating from college and entering a labor market that might not be that receptive to you as it might have been historically. And so I think they're having a lot of issues with saving. They're having a lot of issues entering the labor market, having, of course, issues with inflation and higher prices, and then, of course, the economic policy uncertainty that we're all facing.
Well, so, yeah, enter tariffs. Is it so much, Kyla, the idea that they are actually seeing prices of things like eggs, for example, although that is a situation that has gotten better, appearing different in front of them, or just the expectation that they're eventually going to go up and they're not sure if they are going to be able to afford it?
I think it's both, right? So I think the Dallas Fed manufacturing survey gave us a lot of insight into how, not how millennials are feeling, but how the broad swath of industry is feeling. Like, these were people who were like, we really can't make investment decisions. And if companies can't make investment decisions, they're not going to be able to hire, they're not going to be able to do capital spending. And of course, that's going to impact how they interact with millennial and Gen Zs who are trying to enter or maintain their spot in the labor market. And so I think for everybody, tariffs have been this wild ride, and we have now 25% tariffs on auto imports, and that could be an interesting story too playing out over the next couple of weeks as we reach April 2nd, Liberation Day. But tariffs have definitely been a point of uncertainty, even if they haven't totally taken hold yet.
So if you're a young person, Kyla, then you can't afford a car. You already couldn't afford a house. How much will a break in the housing market, a loosening in the inventories, never mind prices, have to do with the way young people are feeling about the economy?
Housing is an economic foundation. That's really the main thing that people interact with when they enter the economy, and that's kind of the main investment vehicle for a lot of Americans. And so if we can experience some loosening in the housing market, that'd be great. But, mortgage rates are quite high. It's quite expensive to build homes, and there just really isn't that turnover that we need to see in the housing market. So ideally, it'd be quite different, but it seems like it's going to take a while for that to get a little bit better.
All right, Kyla Scanlon, Bloomberg opinion contributor, thank you so much. Coming up, we'll turn to geopolitics as the Trump administration is seeking to control infrastructure and mineral investments in Ukraine as part of a revised partnership deal, according to a draft obtained by Bloomberg News. We'll bring you the details of that next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
One of the things we are doing is signing a deal very shortly with respect to rare earths with Ukraine, which they have tremendous value in rare earth, and we appreciate that.
President Trump last week on a pending minerals deal with Ukraine. And today we have exclusive details as to what that agreement may look like. Bloomberg reporting President Donald Trump's administration is demanding the right of first offer on investments in all infrastructure and natural resources projects under a revised partnership deal with Ukraine. This according to a draft of the document obtained by Bloomberg News. And joining us now with the very latest on this is Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams. So, Nick, we've known that this mineral deal has been in the works for some time, but is this a signal that it's actually going well beyond that if they want future rights to all of this?
Right. I mean, I think what's extraordinary about this document is what we had previously thought that the U.S. and Ukraine were in a very fuzzy sort of cooperation or discussion that basically would be dangled in front of President Trump. Hey, we got this notional agreement with the Ukrainians. Now we can go ahead. That would be something that Ukraine wanted, something that the Europeans wanted. But what we see in here is a very detailed extraction plan where the U.S. is not only going to have massive control over Ukrainian resources, but also have essentially a veto on any other country that would invest in Ukraine. So it feels a lot like a mineral grab in a way, and it's really going to force a big choice from Ukraine, because this is not the sort of intention to negotiate or intention to do business together. This is the real deal.
So does Ukraine basically have to decide now? Is it the U.S. or Europe?
Well, I mean, I think they're hoping that they could potentially continue to push this down the line, or this may be something that they wouldn't have to deal with in the particulars until much later. And the question, of course, would also be the legality of it. I mean, I think, President Zelensky is going to have to take this to the Ukrainian parliament. Would they be willing to pass it? So it's going to put them in a pretty uncomfortable position. They could say, yes, well, let's just agree and move on, and we'll work out the details later. Oops, 2028, President Trump's no longer the president. We've got a new guy. We can scrap this thing. But a lot of unknowns here.
Nick, thank you. Nick Wadhams runs our national security team here at Bloomberg in Washington. For more, we turn to Daniel Fried, former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, former U.S. Ambassador to Poland. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to see you. Welcome back. Give us a sense of what's actually happening behind the scenes here, because this feels very fluid. We spoke with Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. just 2 nights ago and couldn't tell us whether there would be a minerals deal or what phase negotiations we're at. This is the latest snapshot. It'll be different tomorrow?
Fluid is about right. Everything is fluid. The negotiations with the Russians, the Black Sea Fleet deal, Russian demands that are always moving. The Russians are trying to get us to chase them, a sport they excel at and we shouldn't play in. And now the minerals deal. It is very dense. It is very different than the deal that was ready to be signed on February 28th. That deal was a very good deal for Ukraine. You can see why the Ukrainians wanted to sign it. It got the U.S. invested in Ukraine, in the literal and the figurative sense. It was solid. This is much more extensive. Now, snapshot is about right. The Ukrainians are clearly going to push back. It's not set in stone. So let's hope it doesn't give the U.S. such extreme rights as to be a bad deal for Ukraine. The idea of getting the Americans invested in development of Ukrainian minerals is a good idea, because that will convince President Trump, that we have a real stake in Ukraine's security. The Ukrainians want that. But the details are important. And if we ask for too much, the Ukrainians will push back. And as we know, there are people in the administration who support Ukraine and people who feel rather otherwise.
Well, and I wonder if this is really so much about just Ukraine and the United States. What about Europe, who is saying, yes, President Trump, we are willing to step up and we'll provide peacekeeping forces, we'll invest more in our own defense. This deal may not be good for some of those allies.
Well, the outlines of the Trump plan for Ukraine could work. That is, a ceasefire in place and security for Ukraine, with the Europeans, not us, being in the front. The Europeans are slowly getting there, mostly. We'll see. We ought to give them some backup to get them across the line. But President Trump's plan could work. But now he's got to push back against the Russians and not let the Russians play games with us. And he's got to have a deal that's good enough that Ukraine will want to sign it and want to live by it. There's a sweet spot where we make money, the Ukrainians make money, they keep their country, the Europeans do the work, we all win except for Vladimir Putin. But we're not there yet. And the U.S. needs to remember what it got into this to achieve, which is peace in Ukraine, stop the war on terms favorable to us. And let's hope that the initial reports of this deal, the Bloomberg report, Financial Times report, aren't the final word. Because if they are, it's not such a great deal.
Will President Zelensky regret not signing that deal when Scott Bessent went to Kyiv?
Oh, man. The deal on February 28th was a really good deal. Okay, I will just say that. I was sorry that deal didn't get signed.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure Zelensky in the aftermath might be feeling sorry about the way that went down as well, or at least has expressed that he regretted some of what happened.
Right.
It does seem fences have been able to be mended in some sense since then, as the U.S. and Ukraine are talking and the U.S. and Russia are talking. How long, Ambassador, do you think it will be before all three parties can be together at one table when this is no longer parallel negotiations?
Well, this is not the big question. The big, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but
what is the big question?
The big question is whether Putin's going to play seriously or whether he's going to play games. Right now, he was playing games. Look, I know the chief Russian negotiator who was in Saudi Arabia earlier this week. It's Grigory Karasin. I know him. I worked with him before. He knows how to work with us. He knows how to not work with us. And he was not working with us. They are playing games. They're stalling for time. They're throwing in new demands. They're asking that we lift sanctions as a precondition for a ceasefire. What? We should not play that game. That would make us suckers. And I'm not for playing the sucker with the Russians. We need to remember peace through strength. And President Trump has said, and he's right, that we can put pressure on Russia, and he might do that if he decides Putin is stalling. Now, maybe he hasn't reached that point, but I think yesterday he said it's possible Putin is stalling. Good recognition, and I hope the Russians understand that that might be from our president a warning shot. Don't mess. And I think eventually we're going to have to push back and stare down the Russians. And we have, as the president likes to say, we have cards. We can increase sanctions. We can encourage the Europeans to put in forces in Ukraine and do so without Putin's permission. It's not his country. And we can put our thumb on the scale in the interest of the United States.
All right, Ambassador, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Daniel Fried, former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and former U.S. Ambassador to Poland, joining us here on Balance of Power. And still ahead on the show, President Trump pulls Congresswoman Elise Stefanik's nomination to be UN ambassador over concerns about the slim House majority. We'll discuss that next with our political panel right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Now we need Congress to pass the largest tax cuts in American history, and Mike is going to get that. And I think we can finally say one big, beautiful bill, because everybody's there. I spoke with John Thune, who's doing a terrific job also, and the senators, and we want one big, beautiful bill. Just put it all in that bill, and we'll figure a way to have it passed, right?
President Trump yesterday pushing Congress for, yes, one big, beautiful bill to enact his agenda. And today he announced that with that aim in mind, he's asked Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York, to remain in the House rather than moving forward as his ambassador to the UN, which she was nominated for. He wrote on Truth Social, quote, "It is essential that we maintain every Republican seat in Congress. With a very tight majority, I don't want to take a chance on anyone else running for Elise's seat. Therefore, Elise will stay in Congress." Wow. Joining us now for more is our political panel, Kristen Hahn, Rock Solutions partner and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Welcome to you both. Great to have you. Sarah, I'm hoping you can help us out with this one, because I think we all found ourselves a little confused as to how exactly the president just realized the majority is thin and would get thinner if Elise Stefanik came out of the House. Is that really what this is about? Because we've known that for months.
It's about a couple things. So down in Florida, in what used to be Walsh's seat, the Congressman Fine, it's getting very close. I still think we win that, but the polling is showing that it's really tightening up. So that's a concern, obviously. And then in Elise's district, which Elise Stefanik is a member of the Republican Main Street Partnership, what's going on up there is they could not agree on a candidate. And in New York State, all the county chairs have to agree on a candidate. So that became a little bit of a problem. Okay. So unfortunately for Elise, she would have been a wonderful UN ambassador, but she just has kind of gotten caught up in this.
Wow. That's a real answer. It sounds like two reasons in this particular case. What's the consolation prize? if she's
I
going to
have
stay
no
in the
idea.
House.
I don't know, because
There's
now
gotta be
another
something,
member
right?
of Main Street, Lisa McClain, has stepped into that. So I don't know. But Elise is going to be a trooper and do this. And I'm sorry, she would have been a great ambassador, but...
Unless it's wait around a couple of weeks or months, because maybe there's another opening.
Well, the president
suggested that.
In his Truth Social post did say he looks forward to her joining the administration at some point. So I don't know. We still have many years to go of this second Trump White House. But Kristen, to the point Sarah was making on things being tighter than expected in the Florida district for the seat that Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, vacated, is there a real chance that thing flips when he won it by more than 30 points just in November?
I think we're seeing, I wouldn't say unprecedented, but a large amount of money coming into that race from individual donors, meaning very small dollar donations. I mean, the totals are just staggering for a race like that. It's still going to be very, very tough. It's a Republican stronghold, but we need to fight in every district that we can. And I think Elise Stefanik, I mean, unfortunately for her, that her district is also safely Republican, but I think that we would have made a real effort to take that seat. So I think there was probably no other choice.
We're looking at elections in Florida next week. We're looking at Wisconsin Supreme Court next week. And as journalists, we want to project. We want to connect the dots and have some mechanism to forecast the midterms, because it's the first chance we've had since November. How seriously should we take the outcomes of these elections now?
I think all of these smaller races. I think those of us who do this, we're looking at these races that are, we say, down ballot from the congressional seats and the Senate races, and what does that mean? So I think that yes, it's an indicator. I think we should take all of these races in these kind of off-cycle times. And that's the best indicator, I think, of what's to come in the midterms.
Well, so obviously we're all going to be paying attention to this next week, but we're going to be watching what else is happening on Capitol Hill as well, Sarah, because rumor has it the Senate might want to move forward on its budget blueprint, trying to align with the House as soon as by the end of next week. What is the realistic timeline you're seeing here?
That's what the senators, the Republican Main Street Partnership, are saying, that they're hoping to get the vote next week, the end of next week. It's going to be, as we've always said, it's going to be the House version, because that's the only thing the House could pass. So Thune and and Johnson have gotten together, agreed on this. Trump is, as we heard, 100% behind it. So the vote's next week. We're very excited about this. Then hopefully we can get everything together. I still say it could be July, but they're hoping for Memorial Day.
That would be remarkable
if
they pulled it off. We talk about one big, beautiful bill. What if it's not beautiful? What if it's one big Frankenstein bill? And you've got 5 factions in the Republican conference to please. Do you worry about threading the needle on this with so many major endeavors in one piece of legislation?
We certainly do.
Who keeps you up at night?
Many things keep me up at night. But as we move forward, actually, our members voted for it in the House, so they like the legislation. We're not cutting Medicaid. I said that last time. I mean, that's just not happening. There will be some compromise around that. They're really looking for waste and fraud. We found a lot in California just to start with. So nothing in this bill actually keeps me up at night. I think the American people will support it, and I think our members are going to be great to get it passed.
Cuts will be deep enough to make all of your members
I believe it will all make
Freedom
my
Caucus.
members happy. We are not Freedom Caucus,
no, of course,
but President Trump will be calling the Freedom Caucus members, keeping them in line.
Keeping them up at night.
Keeping them up at night. Yes, better them than us.
Perhaps at all hours.
Very late at night.
if when he posts on Truth Social is any indication, you really never know when any phone call is going to hit or a truth is going to drop. Kristen, to Sarah's point on not wanting to touch Medicaid, pretty much every Democrat we've spoken with has said that's mathematically impossible. You're not being intellectually honest about that if you want to achieve these kind of spending cuts without doing so. If they can, though, what happens to all of that Democratic messaging? Because that has been the focus of the pushback against this package.
I don't see how they can. I mean, it's been reported that Republican leadership has said we can get to $700 billion in cuts to Medicaid without a lot of consternation within our conference. And I'm just saying what's been reported, and those extra $180 billion is where it really you run into problems with getting the votes. I just don't see how you get there. We talk about waste and fraud, and there's only so much you can do. And through reconciliation, you can't touch Social Security. I mean, that's the bird rule, right? I mean, so that entitlement program where you could, if you were to reform that, and that's a whole other conversation, would be somewhere where you could save money. So I'm just not sure what you can do. I think that the Democrats, they're right in pointing out the impact that cuts to Medicaid would have. People are concerned about that, particularly in rural areas in states across this country. So I think the messaging is in that respect is on point.
We all want to know what the parliamentarian is going to make of this final product and what is allowed. Leadership, apparently both sides of the aisle, meeting with the parliamentarian to get ahead of this now. What do you know about that?
They're trying to put a little pressure on.
Have those meetings begun?
They have begun.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what the outcome is. I think she'll rule with the Republicans and we'll move forward.
You can fit all of this into reconciliation.
I think you can.
Border policy.
I think you have to. I really think you have to.
That obviously brings up the bird bath is a real thing.
It is.
How do you get border policy in a budgeting?
You have to be very creative.
Okay.
And I think it goes back to what you said. Is it going to be a beautiful bill? No, it's not. Like, no bill that big is a beautiful bill. It's a Frankenstein, just like you said. There are a million things in it. But there's if you're a tactician, right, and you're a legislative tactician, you're looking at how many things can we add and, or subtract in order to make people happy enough and not upset enough to actually get this thing done. And it is, I do not envy the Republican leadership on both sides for having to do this, and they're not going to be Democratic votes in the House. They've got to have all their Republican votes, hence Elise Stefanie.
I don't want to switch gears with just a minute left, but I'm going to do it anyway, Sarah, because I would love to know what Main Street members are hearing or thinking about the signal breach that has dominated Washington for the last several days. I saw YouGov polling today that suggested even 60% of Republicans think something went wrong here.
Something did go wrong. They certainly shouldn't have done it. We're fortunate that it didn't cost any lives, didn't do anything like that. It was foolish to do it. Former member of Main Street, Walsh, he took responsibility for it. I am quite sure it's never going to happen again. So I think the Main Street members are just ready to kind of move on from this.
Can they move on without a resignation or a firing?
I don't know that answer. That's going to be interesting. That's going to be decided over the next couple of days.
Well, and Kristen, the White House clearly wants to move on as well, hence dropping an auto tariff announcement yesterday when this was dominating the news cycle. You're a communicator. You do this for a living. Is the White House doing a good job of spinning their way out of this?
No, and I think, the tariff announcement it did dominate a little bit of the news cycle, but this is pervasive right now, at least for now. And so when you have all the different principals coming out and having different excuses for what was happening, it said to me as a communicator, they're not talking to each other, and they're clearly upset about what happened.
And it's not done yet. Kristen Hunt, Sarah Chamberlain, great conversation. Thanks to both of you for being with us. We'll have much more ahead here on Balance of Power. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese calling an election for May 3rd. We'll get details with a report live from Sydney coming up next on Balance of Power and Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Just out, Australia's Prime Minister calling an election for the 3rd of May. Voters there weighing which candidate can best manage complex relationships with, yes, the Trump administration, as well as China. Joining us live now from Sydney, Bloomberg's Paul Allen. Paul, what's at stake?
Yes, well, for the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he's seeking a re-election as Prime Minister. He'd be the first Prime Minister in about 20 years to successfully do so. The alternative would be suffering the indignity of being a one-term government. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, meanwhile, seeking to lead his centre-right Liberal Party back into power after just 3 years. And polls suggest there's going to be a pretty close race. Top of the agenda domestically, of course, is going to be cost of living. We've had a sneak preview of both parties' plans with the budget and budget reply just this week as well. But as you mentioned, they're navigating the relationship with the United States is going to be a major challenge for both parties as well. Now, Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, says he could have got a carve-out for Australia on these steel and aluminium tariffs. He says should he win, his first trip will be to the US for a meeting with President Trump. Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, has ridiculed that idea, saying, look, no country got a carve-out. And if you look at Australia, it actually runs a rare trade deficit with the the US, means the US sells more to Australia than Australia sells to the US. BlueScope Steel, an Australian steel manufacturer, has the 5th largest steel manufacturing operation in the US. And Rio Tinto said the US asked Australia to send more aluminium after the outbreak of the Ukraine war. We've also got a major defence deal going with the US as well, of course, the AUKUS Pact. But none of that was enough to save Australia. So regardless of who wins, navigating that relationship, going to be a tough one.
All right. That election just 5 weeks away. Bloomberg's Paul Allen, live from Sydney. Thank you so much for joining us. And just a quick programming note, make sure to tune into Bloomberg Surveillance tomorrow morning, 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, for a conversation with Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas, the chair of the House Financial Services Committee.
We'll see you back here tomorrow. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.